Joe, thank you very much, and thank you all. We've had a wonderful day. To paraphrase Franklin Roosevelt, we've had a wonderful day in Rhode Island. And as is always the case, you learn a lot of things when you make this kind of a visit. So I'm going to share briefly with you some of the lessons that I think I've acquired just in the course of this day with Scott and John and a wonderful group of people who have helped to make this possible. And Joe, thank you again for that lovely introduction. I apologize for the fact that my wife is not with me. She's still the best looking Medicare recipient in the United States of America. Unfortunately, she's had to use the benefits. In addition to a back problem, which started when we were out in Los Angeles, difficult though it is, we drag ourselves out of New England in late December. And I teach at UCLA during the so-called winter quarter, and then we come back here. And Kitty began developing some back pain in February. She'd had previous back problems and back surgery, which was very successful. And then we were at the State House in Boston, as we are every year, for a great event, which I'm proud to say I started when I was governor, in which the Greek Consul General presents the laurel wreaths that crown the marathon winners to the BAA officials. And there are about 500 Greeks in the State House cheering all of this on. And about 20 minutes into this, Kitty looked dazzling, I must say, that evening. She started complaining about a pain in her left side. And it got worse and worse and worse. Right there, she developed kidney stones in the Massachusetts State House. And I don't know how many of you have had this experience, but it's not only very painful. There is an operation now which smashes the kidney stones and then tries to get them to pass. And so she's had 2 sessions at the Brigham and Women's Hospital doing this. I think she's getting better, but not good enough to be here. So she sends her regrets. I'm very lucky, folks. We'll be celebrating our 57th wedding anniversary. We actually have 8 grandkids of our own and 4 we inherited, so we got 12. The oldest of whom is now an investigative reporter for ABC News in Washington. Keep your eye on Allie Dukakis. She just won her 3rd Emmy. The second of which is now a sophomore at Tufts and is 6'4", and we're trying to figure out where he came from. And the third of whom, Joby, will be a freshman at PC in September. 2 of our kids went to Brown, so we're doing our best to maintain the connections here. I want to keep this brief. You've got lots to do, and I'm sorry I have to leave you early, because we've been here since I came down in the Accelerator at 9 o'clock this morning. But Rob Restuccia is my candidate for sainthood in Massachusetts. He, above anyone else in that state, advocated for universal health care. And a wonderful, wonderful human being who regrettably a few months ago was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And he's no longer with us. So this is an event which was originally scheduled to honor him while he was alive. And I've just got to get up there and be part of this. I mean, he was just an extraordinary human being. So let me give you just a few thoughts, if I can, about today and some of the things that I've learned and some of the things that I think all of us must get involved in if we're serious about dealing with some of the problems that smart growthers like us care about. And I like that phrase. You know, for a long time we were talking about land use planning and all this kind of stuff, dry stuff, and somebody came up with the phrase smart growth. I don't know who it was, but whoever it is a genius, because it really tells us what we're talking about here. And from an early age, I was a guy that loved history. I must have read the book Johnny Tremaine 50 times. And I used to walk around Boston, in the North End particularly, with that book on my arm, under my arm. I was a kid at the time. Take the tea in and walk around, kind of thinking about this fictional character, to be sure, who was an apprentice to Paul Revere. And I'd walk by the Revere house and go into it and think about it, all this kind of stuff. So watching Boston begin to get torn down, especially with massive highways that clearly wouldn't work and didn't work, was a rather early experience of mine. And when the Commonwealth at the time proposed something called a Master Highway Plan, which would have given Boston a California-style freeway system in, on, and over the city of Boston. And I had just come back at that time from the Democratic National Convention in 1960, which nominated John Kennedy. A great convention, but I couldn't wait to get out of Los Angeles. It was like living, folks, in a toxic stew. Seriously. It was horrible. And I said to myself, it was a very formative experience in my life, and I said to myself, they're not going to do this to my town. I and lots of us, a few of whom are here, decided to take on the Master Highway Plan. It was a 10-year battle. One important piece of it was an 8-lane elevated highway right through Frederick Law Olmsted's Emerald Necklace. For those of you familiar with Boston, right through the fence in front of Simmons Emanuel, right? 3 feet from the MFA, smashing its way across the Charles River and through Cambridge to tie into the central artery on the other side. In fact, there's still a little connection there, which fortunately has never been used, which was supposed to hook up this thing. Ugly as the central artery, for sure. And doomed to fail, as all superhighways these days seeking to serve urban areas have failed. And let me also say, without wandering off my theme, autonomous vehicles aren't going to solve the problem. Because if you've ever looked at a vehicle, autonomous or otherwise, they're the same size and bulk as non-autonomous vehicles, if there's such a word. I assume autonomous is a Greek derivative. I'm not quite sure. And they may help in, last mile connections and that kind of stuff. But autonomous vehicles aren't going to do a damn thing for my capital city or yours or any others. And Boston, as you probably heard, is now, if not the most congested city in America, one of them. If we don't connect North and South Station by rail, so that the good people of Rhode Island, among other people, might get to the Boston Garden in one trip, for example. And the rest of us could have a fully unified commuter rail system. If we don't do that, folks, we're going to soon be the most congested city in America. And one of the things that I've been so impressed with this visit of ours today is just how interdependent Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and for that matter, the entire New England area is when it comes to this kind of thing. New England needs a first-rate regional rail system. That not only connects us with the Northeast Corridor, which someday I hope will go to Montreal, high speed. What do you think? Think about it. Our cities in Montreal connected with modern high-speed rail. But unless we work together, and there's no reason why we shouldn't. We feel close to each other, we have common problems. I think on the whole, New Englanders tend to be pro-rail. These days, as you know, we've got the Downeaster going now to Brunswick, and as I say, someday, let's hope, to Canada. And we've got to work with you, and you've got to work with us to make this happen. The governors of the 6 states, the congressional delegations of the 6 states, which are made up of some very, very capable people, and you've got some great ones, and can have enormous clout in Washington. Richie Neal of Springfield is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. Jim McGovern is the chairman of the Rules Committee. Congressman DeFazio of Oregon was born in Natick and knows us well. And he's the chairman of the Transportation Committee. Peter is the chairman of the Transportation Committee. So while we watch this gong show every day in Washington, and I'll leave it at that, except to say, folks, that all of us better be working our heads off between now and November of 2020. Not only to add strength to the Congress, and I believe we can, but get ourselves and get this country some leadership that is worthy of the name and doesn't treat us to these crazy hijinks every day. But that's going to take work. 50 states, 200,000 precincts, no fooling around. No more reds, blues, and purples. I'm sick of this stuff. In the meantime, we in New England, working together, and I see no reason why we shouldn't. I mean, there's broad consensus in New England, I think, generally about the kinds of issues we're talking about. We've got some work to do with our members of Congress, with our governors, with our state legislatures. And I had a wonderful visit to that legislature. It took me back to my legislative days in the 1960s in Massachusetts. And it's so obvious that we have a set of basic common problems that we ought to be able to solve ourselves with some support, obviously, nationally. And that's, it seems to me, the task we now face. I don't know what happened to the New England Governors Conference. When I and Phil Noel and Tom Salmon, Ella Grasso, and our colleagues as governors were governors, we not only liked each other, we worked together very, very closely and got a lot done. There was a Northeast Midwest Congressional Coalition. Any of you old enough to remember this? With staff and clout that advocated strongly for the broader region. It seems to have disappeared. But it seems to me, at a minimum, the 6 New England governors and our congressional delegations and our legislative leaders, Joe, you and your colleagues, have got to come together around these common goals. And just one little anecdote about our meeting today. When we had that lunch and had a good discussion, and Rosemary Powers, who used to work for me and is now working for your governor, was talking about the state role and talking about how difficult it was for the governor of Rhode Island to connect with the MBTA. I can understand. They were on their 5th CEO in 5 years. It's a little confusing, right? I broke in, I said, Rosemary, tell the governor to forget about the T. Have her pick up the phone and call Charlie Baker, her colleague, and say, you need Massachusetts to do some important work. Let's get going here. Because that's, I think, the way things have to happen. My hat's off to all of your awardees and the work that you're doing. I love this preservation thing. I don't know how many of you have ever read the book Lost Boston by Jane Holtz Kay, which tells us about the tragedies that we committed before we finally caught ourselves and began talking seriously about preservation. I don't know about any of you who may be baseball fans, but you know, if you're born in Boston, you got it. It's a disease. I mean, I can't stop worrying about these guys, you know. But we almost lost Fenway Park to a phony version of the real thing that was going to cost $850 million. And I remember Tom Werner, one of the principal owners, I mean, he's not the big guy, but he's been an active part owner of the Red Sox. When asked about this, when the new management took over, the new ownership took over, and was asked about, what about Fenway Park, he said, interestingly enough, in the context of what's happened recently, he said, Fenway is a cathedral. You don't mess with Notre Dame, interestingly enough. And for a fraction of the cost of this new phony version of the real thing, for any of you who've been up there, Fenway today is a cathedral. Full of people enjoying this really historic sports facility. I caught for the Democrats in the annual legislative baseball game when we had enough Republicans to field a team. We don't anymore. And I was telling folks one of our meetings that a wonderful guy who was a state representative from Worcester, liberal Republican named Al Gamble, tried to come home on a Texas leaguer. And I put the tag on him and broke his leg in 3 places. For days afterwards, the press was talking about how the liberal Dukakis had put it to the conservative. Gamble was not that conservative. And for years afterwards, I'd do his talk show from time to time, you know, as kind of penance for having done it. But that's what makes life so special, doesn't it? It makes, look at this city and what you've done here. I mean, this is not the Providence of old, I can tell you. And yet you've done it with sensitivity and taste and a sense of history. And my hat's off to you. And that's the kind of thing we should be doing throughout the region, working together. The South Coast desperately needs rail to Boston. And if I may add, Providence and New York need rail to the Cape, which we had back when I was governor. I don't know what happened to it. Western Massachusetts needs excellent rail transportation. Why? Because it's not sharing, I'm sorry to say, in the Massachusetts Miracle. And the way to do that, both for Southeastern Massachusetts and Western Massachusetts, is to connect them with excellent rail service. And if you're all serious, and I know you are, about making this state an example of economic vitality and revitalization, you need a first-class public transportation system, which fits your needs, but also connects you effectively and efficiently and well to the broader regional and national rail system. So I hope we can commit ourselves to that and understand just how important it is that we do it together. It's not going to happen if the individual states somehow try to do this. This has got to be a united front, the entire region, working with our leaders in Washington, and making sure that smart growth means what it ought to mean. Now, one final thing on this housing side, on the housing side of things. Ironically, our economic success these days is producing housing problems. Kitty and I bought our house on Perry Street in Brookline, Massachusetts. It's actually half of a house. It's half of a brick duplex. In 1971. It cost us $25,000. Not elegant. I painted the whole place first and foremost, and we did put some money into the kitchen, but it was a stretch at $25,000. It was in 1971. What do you think it's assessed for today? $1.5 million, and we can probably get more. So we're being surrounded by doctors. In fact, couples who are doctors, because they're the only people that can afford to live on Perry Street in Brookline. And they're terrific. We love them dearly. Our other half owner, our great couple, he's both doctors and great ones. He's Vietnamese American, she's Korean American. They've got 2 delicious twins who think Kitty's their foster grandmother. But they're the only folks who can afford a house on Perry Street. And when we moved there in 1971, cops, firefighters, young teachers, working folks lived on Perry Street, not anymore, folks. And what does that mean? Well, we've got to invest in affordable housing. You've got to invest in affordable housing. We've got to invest in affordable housing. And that's going to require some degree of public subsidy, but our prosperity ought to be able to produce at least some of the revenue required to provide those subsidies. And let's make sure it's mixed income housing. I'm proud to say that Massachusetts pioneered mixed income housing. I was a skeptic at the time. It was the real estate guys on this special commission that I served on, they're the ones that said, look, if you do it right, if you keep the deep subsidies down to about 25% of the total units, it'll work. And it does. So there's no need to go back to the ghettoization of poor people in projects, which was a terrible mistake, as we now know. And you can do mixed income housing and do it well. All of this is possible. This is not difficult. What concerns me is our ability to get it done. My state seems to be almost paralyzed when it comes to doing major projects. The New York Gateway project is now at $15 billion and rising. Somebody told me that Paris is doing the same thing for 20% of that cost. And the high-speed rail system in California, which the state desperately needs. I mean, they're going to have 50 million people there in the next 25 years. The automobile simply won't deal with that. Is frankly a mess. I don't know whether the United States has lost the capacity to do this. We used to be, one of the great infrastructure states. But we better turn that around, and fast, because we've got a lot to do. In any event, thanks for a wonderful day. It really has been terrific. I'm sorry I've got to get up to Boston, but it's kind of a special thing. And I'm sorry my dear wife can't be here. We'll bring her back. We'll bring her back. And in the meantime, call on us, work with us, we'll work with you, and try to be as supportive as we possibly can, because we're all working on the same thing, folks. I told somebody today that when I was governor, I used to often say that if the Pilgrims had landed on the West Coast, New England would be a national park. Because we didn't have a lot of natural resources or anything. What do we got? People, brains, imagination, entrepreneurship. That's New England at its best. And there's no reason why we can't do this job and do it well. Thanks very much. Scott says...
Oh, you don't have to, certainly.
Hold on.
It's about 6:52.
Okay. Scott says, well, I take a few questions.
I got a microphone.
Two or three, maybe. I'm sorry, and then I've got to head out to
Gotta be something.
Boston. Nobody? Anybody?
Sure.
Everybody mesmerized
There's a
you?
gentleman over there.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Dan Drazen from Trinity Financial, one of our award winners.
One of my favorites. Jim, where are you? Where's Jim Keefe? Someplace. There he is. There he is. Jim Keefe's brother, Frank, was a pretty extraordinary public servant as well, let me tell you. Anyway.
Governor, it's an honor to have you here tonight. My question has to do with the North-South Rail Link. What do you see as the biggest challenge to getting that to move forward, and how would you address that?
To be perfectly frank, to get Charlie Baker to start paying attention. I mean, this is a matter that requires gubernatorial leadership. I don't care who the governor is. Have we done things like the North-South Rail Link? Well, back in the 80s, we extended the Red Line from Harvard Square to Alewife. Half a mile longer than the North-South Rail Link, 140 feet deep, 3 new stations. It's working pretty well. In current dollars, $1.7 billion. So my collaborator in this, Bill Weld, who's now running for the presidency, as you know, but who feels just as strongly as I do about the North-South rail link. And I have been trying to persuade Charlie to get serious about this thing. And he finally agreed to do a study. All consultant-driven, nothing against consultants. I suspect there are a few of the consultants. But you can't get this stuff done unless you have a chief engineer who runs the project, folks, and is in charge, and is concerned about public finance. Anyway, that study came back to tell us, you won't believe this, that the North-South rail link will cost somewhere between $12 and $21 billion. I mean, we did the red line extension for $1.7 billion in current dollars. What is this? And these estimates now, there was a recent story about a plan to get the Amtrak line from Chicago to St. Louis, from where it is today, 79 miles an hour. Compare that with what we're learning about high-speed rail in the rest of the world. Up to 120. Estimated cost. This is on the prairie. I mean, this is flat land. This is, I don't know. Estimated cost, $2 billion. When I was on the Amtrak board, and Dave Gunn, a great man, and in my judgment, the best CEO Amtrak ever had, was running Amtrak. We completely modernized the Philadelphia-Harrisburg line, modernized its equipment as well. That's 100 miles. Total cost $300 million. We had a chief engineer at Amtrak under Gunn who knew what he was doing. And, you know, if we keep this up, folks, we won't do anything. It's not that you can't use consultants, we use consultants, but first-rate folks in the public sector have to be in charge. And if they're not, you'll end up with these kinds of crazy estimates. South Coast Rail, you know what the latest estimate, Mass DOT, is on the ultimate cost of South Coast Rail? What do you think? I mean, this is, what, from Stoughton to Fall River, New Bedford, on an existing rail line. Yeah, it goes through the Hockomock Swamp, but so does Route 24. It's not as if we've never invaded that place, you know? What do you think? $6 billion. This is preposterous. We've just got to do better than this. Maybe we ought to hire some of you guys from Trinity to come in and help us do it. But cities all over the world are now, and have been, linking these old stub-ebb stations back in the days of private railroads. That's why we have 2 in Boston, why Paris had 4, and one of them's now a museum, but because they were owned by private railroads. They're linking these everywhere. We know what it'll cost. If you're interested, go on our website, North-South Rail Link, and take a look. $12 to $21 billion? This is crazy, you know, and it's making it very difficult for us to do anything. Maybe one last one. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for coming from Massachusetts.
By the way, the Acela train I was on, packed. Absolutely packed. Don't put any of your belongings in the seat next to you because we need it, they said.
Thank you for coming from Massachusetts, but I still see obstacles of having a state line between us and Boston with regard to things like fares on our 2 different transit systems, as one example. Do you have some thoughts about what we could do to have better coordination and collaboration between our states?
Yeah, work together. Plan together. I mean, don't go out and hire some consultant to give you a plan and then come to the neighboring state, whoever you are, and say, now this is our plan and so forth. I mean, you know, when I started in politics, I was a pretty good talker. I was a state representative in a state that had to be one of the 3 or 4 most corrupt states in the country. This is in the 1960s. So I was a big reformer, you know, I was a talker. I was not a very good listener, folks. And one of the things you discover, especially when you get your head handed to you the first time you run for re-election, is that not only do you learn a lot from listening, but it's a lot less tiring to listen than to talk. Seriously. And I finally got it through my head that creating working groups first, with good staff, and then asking folks, often people that couldn't stand each other's guts, they thought, to work together, resulted almost invariably in consensus solutions. And I'm not talking about lowest common denominator solutions. I'm talking about solutions that were a hell of a lot better than some of the stuff that we had been talking about in the first place. That process, if you do it right, works. And I'll finish up, I think I told the story at noontime, but I'll tell it one more time. One of the things that we had was serious crime problems in Boston. It was terrible. And we had 3 or 4 different police forces, and they would each other's throats, and the state police were upset about the Metropolitan Police, and so on and so on and so forth. It's really wild. And this was an idea of my newly elected Lieutenant Governor, John Forbes Kerry, who had been the first assistant DA in Middlesex County. He said, why don't we put together a group of 35 or 40 of the top folks in law enforcement and criminal justice. We'll call it the Governor's Anti-Crime Council. You be the chair, I'll be the vice chair, said Kerry. And let's see if we can bring these folks together. Now, we also added the general counsel of the Massachusetts Civil Liberties Union and victims' rights people and so on and so forth, but mostly law enforcement. Nancy Gertner was the general counsel at the time of the Massachusetts Civil Liberties Union. Subsequently became a federal judge, and a very good one. And she faithfully attended and participated actively in this. Of course, spent a lot of her career suing cops, right? And about a year after we had gotten the Anti-Crime Council underway, at the end of one of the meetings, I said, we used to meet once a month for a full half a day. I said to her, so what do you think? She said, I'm getting worried. I'm starting to like these guys. I said, I don't think you ought to be surprised because, you know, they care about the same things you do, and I hope you care about the same things they do. It really does work, folks. But that's one of the reasons why we've got to create something, starting maybe with the governors, but certainly involving our congressional folks and our legislative leaders, kind of like this working group on the North-South Rail Link that we've created, that can bring people together, get them working, good staff, and make things happen. And trust me, it works. State lines should not be important under these circumstances. I mean, we all have common goals, common, concerns, and I personally would like to see the New England governors kind of reorganize themselves and get back doing what we were doing, because we got an awful lot of stuff done, and we really liked each other, regardless of party. Anyway, that's it. Thank you. If you see a young woman named Josephine Hereford, known as Joby, wandering around Providence in the fall, that's my grandchild at PC.
We'll give her a warm welcome.
And trust me, Kitty's been on a campaign to get every single Dukakis grandkid going to school in the greater Boston area. So we did Bates, we're doing Tufts, we're doing PC, and we got a bunch of others coming along. So we're going to need your help. Thanks.